It's really nice. Eh? I can see that. That's why the room is empty now. Eh? Okay, welcome back. Welcome back. I'll just ask the two ladies in the back there to move to the front, and we should start. Maybe I'll just start with a quiz. Eh? A quick quiz. A quick quiz. How many principles are in the Busan principles? 4. Awesome. What was the first meeting that Josiah talked about? That around the issue of development effectiveness? Any wild guesses? On his chart, Paris, what he spoke about? I'm just waiting for Josiah to fix my laptop. Okay, so we've talked about what had happened at the global level, and we had talked a little bit about what happened at the regional level. So what was happening at the global level was the gathering of governments and development partners, identifying the problem that was existing. Is that even though millions and billions of dollars are mobilized every year for development, for poverty eradication, for gender equality, we continue to see that those inequalities persisted. And many of us sitting around this room know this they deal with this on a daily basis. You deal with this on a daily basis. You're out there in communities and you're seeing how this is happening. That despite all of these things happening, this initiative being launched here, this booklet being done here, this initiative for women being done here, you still see inequalities. And this is part of what drove the leaders to begin the discussions at the global level. And then Josiah talked about the Pacific principles. The leaders attempting to come together and agree on a set of principles to guide work around development cooperation. Why is it important for the Pacific? You might ask it. It's very important for Pacific countries. Why? Because many of the countries in the Pacific are dependent on aid for their budgets. For Fiji, we've enjoyed quite a healthy economic standing. Up until when? A little bit 2006. Well, actually, right now, if my memory serves me right, by July, we would have been at over 80% debt to GDP ratio. Meaning, every $1 we earn, we pay back 80 cents to those we owe money to. Just think about that. If the government collected, if we earned $100 as a country, every $80 is used for debt repayments. That's where we are at as a country. Before, we were able to sustain ourselves to a large extent. But now, more and more, we'll see that we will be dependent on aid that comes in from other countries. And while we were quite independent in that sense before, in the last maybe 5 years ago, other countries around the region don't quite enjoy the same standing as us. Much of their government budget is made up of aid, money that's directed from other countries to help with their budgets. Okay, All right, so I'll quickly get us through what is proposed as the Fiji CSO Observatorio 2022, right? And as perhaps to just jog your memory, when people ask what is development effectiveness, we have our ways of explaining it. Josiah and I attempted to do that. Siale came and attempted to do that. So now you have a level of understanding of what development effectiveness is. Eh? But according to the European Commission, who, by the way, funds CPDE, our partners, and who are funding our meeting, according to the European Commission, development effectiveness is about increasing the impact of our development cooperation. Yeah? Much of what FCOS runs on is development cooperation. FCOS is run, much of our funding, about 90% right now of how FCOS runs is because of development cooperation. It's about increasing the impact of our development cooperation. Why? Because aid is limited. We all know it. We've all often applied for aid with our projects. Lani recently just launched or commissioned 2 water tanks in Bilo community. That's money from Global Green Grant, money from development cooperation. But aid is limited. So that means we need to spend that money as effectively as possible. Why? So that we can achieve the best, fastest, most sustainable impact for those most in need. Particularly most in need. That's the European Commission's emphasis. Development effectiveness is also about better policies in developing countries, right? Coupled with effective development cooperation. That means the policies, the guidelines for how we do development cooperation, they have to be better at making sure that that money goes to communities and changes the situations that we face, so that the aid, really is effective in reducing poverty. Because sometimes you can see so much aid coming in, but we're not seeing the change at the community level. So it really is, this is how the European Commission defines development effectiveness. But we know that the development world took on that challenge through the Busan. This is that thing in that foreign language is the Busan. It's Korean. It's a Korean. So we know that when that challenge was put out, the development world then came up with, of course, we know there were principles or agreements before that, but the one that is quite significant is the Busan Principles, which took place in Korea in 2011. And then the Istanbul Principles is one that came out of CSOs recognizing their own need to commit to it. Because for us as development actors who are working in the, what they call the not-for-profit, civil society sector, we felt that because most of the time we are the ones who are telling government, hey, make sure your development effectiveness. But many times when we look in our backyards, it's very dirty. So the Istanbul Principles is a set of principles that's the civil society, global civil society actors agree to demonstrate their commitment to development effectiveness. 2 sets. One was the Busan one, which is the overall one, which is 4. The second one is the Istanbul Principles. Milika, what page is the Istanbul Principles on? Page 12? Or page 14? 14 or 12?
12 is the Busan.
Oh, okay. Okay, so the Istanbul Principles, there's 8. We can see the photos there. Can we hear one? Louder. One is that. Nakatema. Second. Equitable partnerships. There you go. There you go. All right, so those are the principles that we as CSO, so while we have the Busan one, which guides the overall, all of the development actors, government, private sector, that's the development world, the donor world agreed to. As CSOs, they decided that they would also set up their own set of principles that will align or that will guide how they do that work, the work around development effectiveness around the Busan principles in their own sector. That demonstrates the high level of CSOs to ensuring that development effectiveness is part and parcel of core to their agenda as NGOs. Any questions so far? Okay, following. I haven't left you in Busan. Okay. All right. Then you might ask, why is FCOS involved in development effectiveness? Yeah? And I just wanted to share with you that in the FCOS Constitution, under Section 1.4, it stipulates that FCOS mission is to advocate for just and inclusive development. Sounds familiar? Yeah. Strengthen the non-government and civil society sector. Build quality partnerships across sectors, not just civil society, to improve the resilience and the well-being of our communities. Does it sound a little bit familiar? You see connections to Istanbul? Yes? Busan? A little bit, okay, good. And in our strategic plan 2022 and 2026, which you have here, it talks about the kind of Fiji we want by 2030, the vision. Yeah? We envision a Fiji whose people are like this, yeah? Whose governance respects and upholds human rights. That sounds familiar? Yeah? Vanua as a dialogic space, sustainable, robust. Yeah? But most especially is this area in the strategic plan. Strategic area focus 2, which is around CSO coordination and development effectiveness. Yeah? So it's part and parcel of what we have to do as FCOS, because it's in our constitution and it's in our strategic plan. Yeah? Why is that, you might ask? That's because we're a membership-based organization. A lot of what we do has been driven by the members. Yeah? The goals of the members, the objectives of the members. Any questions? No? Clear? Can move? Okay. All right, so now we're going to get to the CSO Aid Observatorio. It sounds really complicated, but CSO Aid Observatorios are citizen-driven monitoring platforms of aid and development cooperation for campaigning and policy work. Not political campaigning, because we are not a political party. Right? Campaigning for our causes, which is about people's well-being. All right, so now that you know what a CSO Aid Observatorio is, it's a citizen-driven, citizen-led monitoring platform, but particularly looks at how aid and development cooperation is unfolding at those levels, whether it's at the national level or at the subnational level, but they do that sort of thing. They monitor aid and development cooperation. I'll show you an example of Reality of Aid, which is a member of this CPDE. This is, for example, what they do or how they do CSO Aid Observatorio work. You see that they promote awareness and transparency on the management of aid by recipient governments and other providers. IFIs are international financial institutions. What are examples of IFIs? Anyone? Wild guesses? Institution? Sorry? IMF, right? Who else is like IMF in the world? World Bank? Who else? ADB, there's quite a few financing institutions that are in Fiji, and all of those that have been mentioned are IFIs. So actually, when you look at reality of aid is in Africa, Asia, Europe? No, just those two. Because do you see a trend? These are regions that receive lots of aid. So actually, the reality of aid Observatorio has all of these objectives. So they do that. They promote awareness and transparency on the management of aid. They do aid research and analysis on the trends and impacts of development projects and public and private partnerships in the region. So development projects that are funded by ADB, for example, or funded by World Bank, they monitor those. And we heard an example from Samoa. That didn't even take off, because that's how closely a Samoan group monitored the work that they did. They assist the engagement of CSOs. So the Reality of Aid Observatorio assists the engagement of NGOs, civil society groups with recipient and donor governments and other providers. So they actually play that facilitating role, connect. That's what the Aid Observatorio does. They also assist with advocacy campaigns of communities, of grassroots and people's organizations. How many of you come from people's organizations? Can you put your hands up if you come from people's organizations? Man, all of you came from people's organizations, right? For the assertion of their democratic rights and for seeking transparency and accountability from governments and other providers, right? Do you see any mention there about CSOs with money? No. In fact, they say grassroots. That means any group that wants transparency can speak, whether you have money or not. Facilitate shared learning and discourse among CSOs, policymakers, academia, people who do research that are in universities that we often find disconnected. We also have to work with them under the CSO Aid Observatory. Well, at least Reality of Aid does that. Media and activists for the promotion of human rights-based, people-powered, sustainable development. That's what Reality of Aid does through its CSO Aid Observatorio. That's just an example of the kind of work that Aid Observatorios do. Right? Any questions so far? You following? Or have I left you in Asia? Following? Right? Okay. The other aspect to this is around people's research. CSO Partnership for Development Effectiveness defines this as a research that serves the needs and interests of the people. The two questions I thought might be really relevant here is, for whose interest do we do research? If you've been engaged in your own research, think about that deeply. Who are we doing this research for? Is it for the people that are in your community, or is it for some other group, some other people, some other organization? Is it serving their interest or my community's interest? Various methods and approaches is used in conducting people's research, but what is important is that the research is, when we talk about people's research, is the research is of, by, and for the people. Amen? Amen? Right? People's research is research that serves the needs and interests of the people, particularly the marginalized and disempowered. Although the research calls for objectivity, we know that we've worked in researches where they've been particular about the process and methodology. Bias, but people's research is not value-free. That while it calls for objectivity, it is not value-free, meaning that it's principles-based. We research, we use a principle that drives. See, for example, Tata. Okay, so two, for example, is one of the research we did. You recall, this was only done in the Central Division. It's a pity, not a, no, CPS led that research. And that research was led from by the principal or guided by the principal of cell 2. And that's how the research was designed. And so many people were like, what's that? Yeah? But academia couldn't wrap their heads around that. Why? Because it was the people's research. Yeah? We call for objectivity, but it is not value free. We are biased in the sense that we use a principle to guide how we do this research. Yeah? And we make no secret about it, even though people like this. No, it's not. No, it's actually based on a principle. That's why we are doing it this way. Yeah? The underlying purpose for that research, as well as for the purpose, is that so that the results are used are not neutral. Yeah? So when people say, oh, it's neutral, it's not neutral, because in the academia world, research is supposed to be neutral. It's supposed to be very objective. Yeah? And sometimes we get annoyed with it. Why? Because it's very disconnected from the realities of our people. Sometimes when people come and show their fancy research, you tell them, oh, no. Yeah? No, that's actually not what's happening. They offend us. Why? Because it does not take into consideration the nuances that's in communities, yeah? The conditions. They don't understand how our societies work. That's what people's research is about. Yeah? And sometimes they'll ask you to guarantee, is this neutral? And you can tell them straight away, no, it's not neutral, because it's based on a principle. Yeah? That's the idea of people's research. So both the elite and the masses can use research as a tool to further their own interests. Yeah? We know that already. We've been researched over and over again. So many people come, this ministry, that NGO, come to ask you questions. Yeah? Do we see the result of it? Why is that? Because of exactly that sometimes research is done for their own interests. But people's research is about the interests of communities. That's the idea of it. The difference is that elite research preserves the status quo, meaning the power structures remain. Okay? But the research that is done under people's research seeks to contribute to social change. Yeah? That's what people's research tries to do. All right. Are you following? Can I move to the next slide? You got questions? I'm looking to the back. No? Okay, great. All right. So we're just taking a break to help process what we've heard. Having presented to you all of that, is FCOS, from what you recall of what we have done, is FCOS engaged in either of those, the observatorial work that I've described to you, or the people's research? Okay, anyone? Sydney has a response?
My response to the question.
Yes. Which one?
For research.
People's research. Okay. People's research
On localization.
on localization. Thank you. That's Sydney. Anybody else? Are you involved in any of this as a member of FCOS? Say in the CSO Observatorio or the people's research? Do you recall if I described to you the activities, do you think you were involved in any of these? And you can guess. PFM himself. Who was involved in PFM? Public Finance Management? I think so too. Maybe I should make them run around, eh? Yeah? People's research? Livelihood? Yeah? Okay, so I know that a lot of you sitting around here look very puzzled. So I'll get you through the next slide. So I show you, yeah, I'll let you know whether you did it or not. Okay. All right, so the question for both is yes. Okay, question my pet. Don't bully pet. Pet was up at 3 a.m. Oh, yeah, pet, please have it. UNICEF, okay. Naka, Lotoka was involved in UNICEF. Anybody else? Any wild guesses? Okay, that's okay, because we're going to get through the next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce you to FCOS's CSO Observatorio Framework. Eh? Looks pretty new, eh? Right? So generally, FCOS's CSO Observatorio Framework is in 4 parts. We have the people's research tools, right? The project-based surveys, the CSO standards for effectiveness, right? And then the evidence-based policy advocacy. This is the framework for FCOS's CSO Observatorio. So yes, I just answered the question on whether there's, we are involved in the CSO Observatorio work, right? Okay, understand? Questions? No? Okay, not yet? Okay. If you are wondering whether you were involved, I want to show you this so that you can see how you were involved. Yeah? Okay, so here we have the framework, but this one breaks down exactly what this is, how this happens at the operational level, right? How many of you have done community observation reports? Terita, Beth, Monica, yeah? Kitty, Tima, yeah? We've all done observation reports, yeah? So actually you are doing this, yeah? The people's research tools. You actually doing people's research, eh? It's a pity that the North is not here because they just finished one, a Kadivaka diagnosis. Eh? All right, then the project-based surveys, which was mentioned, PFM, UNICEF. Eh? So actually you are part and parcel of this framework. You just didn't know it. We're just coming together to bring this framework together. So if you took part in that, you were involved in this part of the observatorio framework. You see yourself in here? Right? Code of accountability assessment. We've not talked about code of accountability. This is what happens when you don't have practice. Since 2020, because we're too busy doing work, response work. But there's a code of accountability, and some of you were present when we had launched that in Lotoka. And we've tried to evaluate that or review it on an annual basis. We just couldn't do it last year. A code of accountability. There's an assessment framework. The assessment framework was piloted in the North with the Sabu-Sabu DICOS, members of the Sabu-Sabu DICOS. And if you look through your folder, you'll see that there is the assessment forms that were filled up by groups, right? My team will try and avail more copies of the Code of Accountability tomorrow, because then we will undertake those assessments ourselves, right? The localization framework, some of you were consulted, some of you were involved in the testing of the framework. There are tools too that are being proposed, and in your folder you'll have the localization framework there as well. What are those two about? Those two are about testing our effectiveness, those are standards that we are holding ourselves to as CSOs. They're about making sure that when we're doing work in disaster or when we're doing work in perhaps in any other area of work of development, that there is a level or a standard that we are upholding. Why do we uphold standards? So that we are effective. So that's already in place. The North probably is more familiar with that because they had to, that was where it was piloted. And then I come down to the all-important activity of evidence-based policy advocacy. Many of you were involved in that as well. The budget submissions at the divisional level. Some of you often get my emails about legislations or policies that are being reviewed. You convey your ideas to Josiah. Josiah goes and talks at the policy discussions. We're all participating in this. Perhaps in the last few years, the opportunities to do so have been limited because of the restrictions. But if you recall, we were at a discussion with at the Holiday Inn, some of you last year, and we had UN partners, we had government partners in the room, and we were telling them about our experiences from the disaster response and how things needed to change. The COVID-19 response. Some of us shared the challenges we faced as we were volunteering alongside government. All of that is part of our evidence-based policy advocacy. Because we've gathered some of this experience, some of the data from here. We've looked at this as well, specifically on issues. This is about us. How do we become effective if this policy restricts my ability to help? We've all brought it to here. At some point or another, you've been sitting in a meeting with either the divisional commissioner or the PA. Those are policy advocacy spaces as well. And at the national budget submissions. This is really the nuts and bolts of our CSO Observatorio framework. So while it sounded like something very difficult and very distant from us, actually you have been participating in it. I just want to show you that all of these things that we talk about and seems very far-fetched, you're contributing to it through that. Yeah? Okay. Josiah talked about the Istanbul principles. We've got the Busan principles and the Istanbul principles, which I shared to you. There were two ways in which the development world responded to the need for development effectiveness. One was the Busan principles, the other one for CSOs in particular, the Istanbul principles. Okay, so when we look at that, what I tried to do on this side, those little bubbles on the side, every how many years? 2 years? Every 2 years, the world undertakes, well, there's an invitation to government to present a report, a voluntary report, right? A voluntary report about how they are implementing the Busan principles. Yeah? So the government of Fiji actually reported in 2018 about how they are aligning. Yeah, and there's a set of indicators that they use that's developed alongside those 4 principles. So we have the 4 Busan principles, and then they monitor that on a 2-year basis. It's just monitoring. So there's the first round, the second round. I remember the second round was done for Fiji. We had convened a consultation of CSOs to try and contribute to that report. And I recall Nandi Dikos came to it through Avelia, country called well, Sabu Sabu, Raki Raki, a few others that came. But the 2-year monitoring have like a set of indicators. They number 10. There's 10 indicators by which we measure how governments are aligning with Busan principles. If you look at what we have done already, those in green, you can see the green, Those in green are indicators we are already tracking through those work. Yeah, so your work is actually contributing to those indicators. The ones in yellow are the ones that we have yet to incorporate. Right? So your work in the last few years has actually embedded the Istanbul principles and the Busan principles. And that's the way it's been done. Do you feel relieved now? Okay. Any questions? You might ask me about this. So this style is about where we connect with national plans, where we connect with regional plans for development, and the global plans. This is why at this point, when we start to collate all the evidence at the national level, at your secretariat, we look at, hey, why didn't they invest in here? Because obviously the evidence is saying we should have invested here. Just check the national development plan and see whether it's probably prioritizing another thing or another area of work. That's when we begin to make the connections. So that's what that's usually done at the national level with the secretariat. So once we collate, the team will call, well, we don't have water in this area. I don't know why they are not coming. We've been asking. So we'll check back. Commissioner, so the commissioner will say, right, this quarter, they have prioritized another area here. Maybe that will be prioritized for the next year. So usually we have to try and relate it to the development, because if we can connect it to the development plan, they will not listen. But say, wait, next year is the one, it'll come to that place next year. Yeah, some priorities on the national development plan that's related to that area of priority for you. We look at the Pacific 2050 strategy, we look at the Pacific plan. So we can tell leaders, even though it's not in the development plan, it's there in the regional plan. Please align the. And sometimes when that doesn't work, we go right to the global level. You have already agreed as leaders, global leaders, to this. These are the indicators, these are the standards, but our government is not doing it. That's how we use the evidence that you've collected, is to try and connect it to those national, regional, and global. Have I confused you more? Have I lost you at the global level? Questions? Is it too much to absorb in the morning? Okay. Can I move on? Okay. And in your folder, you'll see that, it's there in your folder. If you're wondering. Okay, we'll come to the most exciting part of the program, which is group discussions, right? And group discussions are focused on, where you see your work in this framework. And some of you have already gotten clues from the framework that we've shown you. And I guess the next maybe 45 minutes is just going to focus on understanding your experiences as you engage at those levels, right? At those, those 4 activities, the framework, to understand whether you were able to, whether those experiences, first of all, whether those experiences have been negative or positive, yeah? And you can go to town about describing that. Negative in the sense that you didn't understand why you didn't have to collect it. You collected it, and then we used it in a different way at F course. What are those things we want to understand? If it's been positive, we want to understand that also. So it's a little bit of a Talanoa too. And then the other thing is for you to perhaps talk to us about how we scale up this work. Now that you understand the whole framework, because sometimes, put it this way. Or sometimes when you send us things and we'll go, how is it impacting children? How many children are there? And you'd be, why are you asking me these things when it's flooding in this bloody area? and I'm trying to get people to safety. Yeah? We would like to understand how those experiences have been. And the second thing is to, now that you know that overall framework, the big picture, how do we help scale up that work so that you can see change at your level? How do you see change taking place? You know, now that you see that observatory, now that you know that this information doesn't just go here, this information goes here, here, here. Yeah? And this is the overall observatorial framework. This is what everyone's supposed to be doing at this level, at this level. Is that, of course, doing enough to bring this situation or this data here, connected here, to be able to get us the change? Yeah? How do we scale that up? How do you see that happening? So for the next maybe 45 minutes, it's just about talking about that. Yeah, knowing about where you see your work in this framework, how do we scale up this work? Right? Understood? Questions? Maybe I open it up for questions before you go into your groups. Maybe we can go into 1, 2, 3. So we are dividing ourselves properly. Yeah?
Just for those that may not be involved in the research, I know that we have some of the mathematicians here. Their first time, so your data, I know that you have all the information that is available that you can also bring to the floor.
Yeah, sorry, I think it's not only focused on your work with FCOS. I know we all represent different community-based organizations. This is also the time that you can use your work in other capacity that you hold in your district. Yeah? So just working on those people's research, surveys. I know for sure Tima is here. Tima also with family, their work that they're doing on the community. So how do we bring them together in what we're talking about development?
We might get to that afterwards. This session is about just that. Yeah. That's if the tools that we've created is okay, is it having a negative impact on you? Because sometimes when you're collecting, sending us information and we are using that to, inform government, sometimes the, repercussions are that, sometimes the DOs can come to you and say, did you share that too? Yeah. We'd like to understand all of that within the FCOS framework. After lunch is the session that Josiah is describing, to look at your other habits. Because for us, it's about also protecting or safeguarding our members, and making sure that as you're participating in this, while we want your voice to be enhanced and we like to ensure that the tools also safeguard you, we'd like you to be as effective as possible, but to be safe as well. And that is the interest of FCOS in this area, that we not only boost your effectiveness as a community advocate, but also that we protect, you and the work that you do in community. So being out in community, sometimes the safety nets are not there, as you have in the, SUVA, for example. So maybe that's where we want you to focus for now, and then we'll expand, because the affiliations you have are safety nets as well. So we'll go into that after lunch. For now, we focus on you working as particularly under the FCOS umbrella. Yeah? And you can do your discussions at the back or in the middle here. We have close to 35 minutes. 35 minutes, you can have it here, you can have it outside, but by 1, we'll go off to it. Yeah? All right. 45 minutes, 35 minutes. Okay, maybe I thought we could divide ourselves, maybe just 2 groups, so 3 groups. 3 groups, 3 groups. If we can count ourselves to 3 from Milika. 1, 2, 3.
3, 1.
Okay, so 3 groups. Group 1, if you are group 1, where would you like to sit? Lounge area, group 1, group 2. 2. Lounge area, group 2 can be here, eh? 2 here, 3 at the back there. Yes? Okay. I know there's low energy, but that's okay because you came very early and it's taking a bit of time to process this. All right, so we'll get a move on. Okay.
So I give you one system in Ghana.
But we would like to see the